The wasteland has a way of feeling ancient, even though the bombs fell only a blink ago in the scale of the world's memory. When you walk through an abandoned stretch of cracked highway, the silence wraps around everything like a faded blanket, softening the jagged ruins and the rusted metal skeletons left behind. The wind that drifts across old billboard frames carries a low hum, almost like the faint echo of electricity that once ran through them. Fallout's world isn't just empty. It feels like it is quietly remembering the shape of what once stood there, replaying fragments of a life that used to fill the air with noise and light. Even in the stillness, there is a pulse, slow, steady, patient, reminding you that the world never truly died. It simply changed shape, waiting for someone to walk its roads again. Across the Mojave, the desert sands shift in soft waves at night, revealing pieces of the old world one grain at a time. A bent license plate, a half-buried sign, a melted bottle that glows faintly if the moon hits it right. These details aren't just debris, they're quiet artifacts of humanity slipping through the cracks in the dunes. The desert has preserved them like relics, baking them into the earth, holding on to them the same way an old house keeps the echo of footsteps long after its family has gone. In the right light, with the world gently breathing around you, it's easy to imagine that the desert is whispering those stories back to you, one gust of wind at a time. And then there are the creatures, the ones that evolved because the wastes demanded reinvention. Brahmin graze peacefully in broken fields, their two heads moving with a strange, synchronized patience. They're oddly calming to watch, their dual perspectives blending into one gentle rhythm. For settlers, these animals are a lifeline: food, milk, leather, companionship. But in the quiet moments before dawn, when the sky is a soft gray and the world hasn't woken yet, they feel like remnants of a forgotten mythology. Mythic beasts wandering a land that no longer has myths of its own. The wasteland turned them into symbols, living proof that even destruction can create something stubborn enough to survive. Giant radroaches crawl through the cracks of abandoned tunnels, their glossy shells reflecting dim light like pieces of wet obsidian. As unsettling as their size can be, there's something strangely peaceful in the way they move, slow, deliberate, unhurried. The radiation didn't make them angry or monstrous. It simply made them bigger, more noticeable, harder to ignore. They thrive in the shadows of a world that tried to end itself, proving that even the smallest life finds a way to continue. In the soothing dimness of old metro stations, the quiet tapping of their footsteps against concrete can almost resemble rainfall. If you stand near a pool of glowing water in the capital wasteland, you'll notice that the surface doesn't ripple in the usual way. The radiation gives it a gelatinous shimmer, as if time moves slower wherever the glow is strongest. These puddles often collect in deep, silent bowls formed by collapsed streets or bomb craters, creating strange, luminous reservoirs where the world feels suspended. Travelers avoid them out of caution, but in the calm stillness of night, the light reflects across broken structures in a soft, wavering pattern that almost feels sacred. The glow is a reminder of tragedy, but it also paints the ruins with a gentle, otherworldly beauty. Out in the Commonwealth, fog rolls in with a weight that feels almost alive. It swallows entire neighborhoods in a pale blanket, muting the colors of old billboards and softening the jagged edges of collapsed rooftops. The fog isn't dangerous on its own, but it transforms the world into something dreamlike, a place where time seems to slow and distances stretch longer than they should. Sometimes you can hear faint metal creaks or distant thuds muffled by the fog, echoes of settlers working or creatures moving, but softened until they sound like memories instead of threats. It's one of the rare moments when the wasteland feels gentle, almost protective, as if the world is giving itself time to rest. Rad stags move through the forests with a grace that feels impossible for creatures so changed by radiation. Their bodies bend and flow between trees as though they were always meant to have two heads watching opposite directions. When they lock eyes with you, there's no aggression, only curiosity, as if trying to understand why a human has wandered into their quiet clearing. In the early morning light, when the air is still and cool, their breath creates thin spirals of mist that rise and fade like smoke signals to no one. The wasteland can be harsh, but there are creatures like the rad stag that embody its softer side, resilient, serene, and strangely beautiful. During long journeys between settlements, you'll sometimes find old radio towers standing tall and silent against the sky. Their wires hum faintly when the wind rushes past them, creating soft metallic tones that almost resemble music. Some towers still carry faint radio signals, leftover fragments looping forever in the background noise. Half a sentence, a clipped verse of a long-forgotten song, a burst of static that feels rhythmic. Standing beneath one of these towers at night, you can almost pretend the world is trying to speak again, gathering its scattered pieces and sending them out into the sky, hoping someone is still listening. The old pre-war houses that dot the landscapes of Fallout often hold little moments of humanity that survived the bombs, a children's toy resting where it fell, untouched for centuries. A dining table still set for a meal that never came. A letter pinned to a wall, its ink faded, but still legible enough to feel personal. These places aren't just ruins. They're frozen moments, quiet snapshots of the second before everything ended. When you explore them in the soft glow of a Pip-Boy light, it feels less like scavenging and more like paying respects to a life paused mid-story. Even after everything, the wasteland remembers the people who live there, keeping their final moments preserved in dust and stillness. You can sometimes find fireflies glowing faintly around the woods of Appalachia, their soft lights dancing between the trees like embers carried on a gentle breeze. The radiation has warped some into strange variants, but the ordinary ones still shimmer with a warm, golden pulse. Watching them drift through ruined forests feels almost healing, a reminder that some parts of nature survived without twisting into something unrecognizable. Their slow, hypnotic drift makes the woods feel calmer than they have any right to be. A place where the world's scars feel just a little less deep. Go deeper into forgotten caves in the Mojave, and you'll encounter pools of still water reflecting the faintest glimmer of light. These underground spaces feel untouched by the chaos above. Sometimes you'll hear a distant drip echo endlessly, creating a soothing, rhythmic sound that plays like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The silence in these places isn't empty, it's comforting, full of the steady patience of a world that endured. The caves are reminders that beneath the scorched horizon, life found ways to wait out the storm, quiet and undisturbed. If you approach a sentry bot long before it detects you, you can sometimes hear the faint whir of dormant machinery ticking like a mechanical breath. These robotic guardians were designed to outlast the world, and in many cases, they have. Even in sleep mode, they emit low pulses of power checks, a pattern so soft you can barely hear it. The robots themselves are relics of a world obsessed with protection, yet in their stillness, they feel almost peaceful, monuments of metal waiting patiently for their purpose to be remembered. The wasteland skies have their own personality too. In the Commonwealth, sunsets paint the world in bruised shades of purple and orange, casting long shadows across rusted cars and overgrown highways. It's one of the rare times when the world feels gentle, as though the sun itself is trying to soften the day's harshness with color. If you stand still long enough, the shifting light almost makes the ruins glow, reminding you that even after devastation, beauty finds its way into the cracks. And in the glowing sea, where radiation twists the land into surreal shapes, the world takes on an eerie, dreamlike glow. The green mist drifts in slow motion, curling around the skeletal remains of buildings like ghostly fingers. But even here, where the world's fury was at its strongest, the silence feels heavy and almost sacred. Creatures lurk in the haze, but the atmosphere remains strangely calm, as though the land itself is trying to lull you into a quiet trance despite its danger. Out west in New Vegas, the neon lights flicker against the darkness like stars reborn in the desert. The strip hums with electricity the rest of the world forgot, casting warm colors onto cracked pavement and old casino signs. Even from a distance, you can hear the faint hum of generators struggling to maintain the illusion of pre-war glamour. The lights don't just illuminate the night. They preserve a memory of the world's old dream, refusing to fade even when everything else did. There's a strange serenity that hangs over the capital wasteland at dawn, a quiet that almost feels intentional, as though the world is trying to remember what mornings used to sound like before everything changed. The light moves across ruined concrete in soft stripes, catching the edges of rust and broken metal until even destruction feels gentle for a moment. And beneath that quiet glow lie details that most wanderers never notice. Small stories woven into the bones of Fallout's world, hints of the old world echoing through its ashes. One of those details hides deep in the ruins of suburban streets, where half-collapsed garages sometimes contain cars that still have intact license plates. The numbers on them aren't generic. They reference real US license formatting from the early 2000s, locked in time at the exact technological moment the world froze. The apocalypse didn't erase civilization. It preserved it, capturing what was mundane and turning it into a relic. Even the radios carry remnants of forgotten design. The soft, static crackling between songs is tied directly to the in-game weather system, subtly shifting depending on wind direction, storms, and nearby electromagnetic damage. That static acts like a pulse of the wasteland, a reminder that even the comforting voice of a DJ is shaped by the broken world surrounding them. Some players swear that certain broadcasts grow softer when you travel near old military bases, as if the ruins themselves are swallowing the sound. Out across the Mojave, the neon glow of New Vegas flickers with imperfect timing, but it's not random. The lights on the strip follow a coded sequence based on actual casino systems, cycling through patterns tied to power fluctuations beneath the city. When the strip dims during power surges, it isn't just atmosphere, it's the world running out of breath for a moment, trying to hold on to its last few sparks of glamour. Just outside that glowing heart, the desert reflects the sky in subtle ways. At night, the sand turns almost silver because the game layers a faint reflective sheen across dunes, meant to mimic moonlit quartz. That tiny detail makes the desert feel alive, shimmering like the ocean of a world that no longer remembers what oceans were. Vaults, too, have their own quiet stories hidden in plain sight. The hum that echoes through their halls isn't simply ambient noise. It uses a slightly altered electrical hum that rises and falls in a 3-beat pattern. Most real-life generators run on a 2-beat cycle, but Vaultex are uneven, intentionally unsettling, a reminder that even safety feels wrong in these places. Some vault lights brighten by 1% each time you visit a new area, giving the illusion that your presence is waking the vault up after decades of silence. These subtle changes make the vaults feel like they breathe in your footsteps. And when you look up toward the broken highways stretching across Fallout's landscapes, you might catch glimpses of old road signs baked in rust. The slogans on those signs were pulled from pre-war political campaigns, scraps of old-world optimism that linger long after the candidates became dust. Some slogans describe prosperity, others unity, but all of them hang over a world that failed to prevent its own collapse, turning hope into scenery for wanderers who will never know the people who wrote it. Super mutants carry stories as well. Their voices echo with layered frequencies that include faint human tones beneath the gravel. If you listen closely, you can hear remnants of the person they once were, trapped in a growling chorus of pain and strength. The tone of their roar subtly changes depending on the weapons you're carrying, a fear response coded into their AI that reveals just how much they still understand about danger. The Brahmin that lumber across the wasteland are designed with uneven breathing patterns. Their two heads don't inhale at the same time, creating an unsettling syncopation that makes them sound both alive and unnatural. Their footsteps also register differently depending on the slope of the ground, a tiny detail that helps make even mutated cattle feel grounded in reality. In Diamond City, the green-tinted lights aren't just aesthetic choices. They mimic the interior glow of real baseball stadiums before the war, honoring the bones of Fenway Park beneath them. The city is built inside a stadium shell, and the faint emerald tint pays homage to the old lighting rigs that once illuminated cheering crowds. It's a memory disguised as survival, a world trying to honor the one it replaced. Ghouls, for all their tragedy, carry one of Fallout's most beautiful secrets. Their idle breathing animations include soft, trembling exhales meant to represent fragile lungs damaged by radiation. But there's a second animation tied to their gaze. When they stare at old pre-war posters, their breathing slows slightly, as though something deep inside them remembers who they used to be. It's barely noticeable, yet heartbreakingly human. And if you ever pause in the ruins of a pre-war home, you may hear faint tapping sounds. This isn't wind or debris, it's part of the environmental storytelling. The taps mimic air ducts expanding and contracting in temperature changes, simulating the settling of old structures that refuse to fall apart. Even abandoned houses cling to rituals of the past, their walls performing old routines for a world no longer watching. Down in Nuka World, some animatronics judder in place not because they're broken, but because their movement cycles intentionally include a 3-frame stutter. This simulates failing motors, giving them that uncanny sense of life just barely holding together. Even amusement feels haunted in Fallout. Robots like Protectrons have blinking patterns that correspond to memory access cycles, creating the illusion of thought. Their eye lights dim during processing and brighten when returning to idle. It's a quiet humanization, machines thinking visibly, giving them the haunting charm Fallout is known for. And then there are the landscapes themselves. In Fallout 76, some forests shift color more dramatically at certain times because the lighting model includes a subtle atomic haze, a leftover remnant of radiation clouds. The haze adds a faint yellow wash, like sunlight bending through a broken sky. Across every region, the world of Fallout carries memories etched into metal, stone, and silence. And when you walk through it, the game responds with tiny echoes, flickers of light, changes in wind, whispers of static, reminders that the wasteland is not empty, but full of stories waiting to be felt rather than seen. There's a strange comfort in imagining the world before the bombs fell, a version of America frozen at the height of its confidence, when every street hummed with neon promises and chrome-trimmed optimism. Even now, centuries after that light went out, remnants of the old world still whisper through the wasteland, each detail hinting at how people lived, loved, and prepared for a future they never expected to lose. Some of these echoes are obvious: the billboards, the radios, the half-buried cars, but others hide quietly under dust and ruin, revealing fragments of a world desperately trying to hold on to normalcy even as it slipped toward disaster. In several pre-war suburbs, the mailboxes are still full, sealed tight by heat and time. Many of them contain circulars for local shops, grocery ads, and coupons promising deals on sugar, flour, and perfectly preserved Salisbury steak. Most of these goods vanished with the rest of the old world, yet the coupons remain untouched and valid in spirit, as if waiting for a customer who will never arrive. The mundane details, sale dates, cartoon mascots, cheerful fonts, become haunting when you realize how ordinary life looked right up until the final flash. People were still planning their meals, still mailing letters, still trying to save a few caps before caps even meant anything. The pre-war cars scattered across the wasteland carry a unique detail in their design that players often miss. Beneath the hood of many models rests a small plaque describing the vehicle's nuclear engine in playful, almost whimsical language, as if the manufacturer wanted drivers to think of atomic power as something friendly and harmless. The plaque often features a cartoon atom smiling in encouragement, an intentional marketing tactic from a century where the world had learned to repurpose fear into consumer enthusiasm. Even now, the cars hiss softly with stored radiation, the gentle hum of a dream that promised infinite energy but instead delivered infinite loss. In old red rocket stations, the shelves stocked with dusty tools aren't all that they appear. Some tools have reinforced grips and subtle geometric markings, the kind used by early Vault-Tec contractors. These markings were intended to identify which items could safely be used near prototype reactor materials. Anyone wandering through a ruined fuel station today might pick up a wrench that was once handled by workers who genuinely believed they were building the future. Their fingerprints linger only as memory, but the tools remain exactly where they were left, waiting patiently as centuries pass. The Protectrons still wandering certain ruins do so with pre-written personalities stored in their memory cores. Some are programmed to mimic cheerful store clerks, others polite customer service representatives, and a few even carry remnants of old radio ads built into their greeting messages. Each robotic voice represents a sliver of an age that believed in automation as the solution to every inconvenience. There is something both sad and comforting in hearing a machine greet you with the same cheerful tone it used 200 years ago, unaware that its customers are gone and the store it was meant to protect has long since collapsed. In a few bunkers, players can find pre-war propaganda pamphlets listing simple household preparedness steps. These pamphlets, written in friendly language and decorated with cartoon illustrations, instruct families on how to store food, create emergency kits, and identify blast shelters. What stands out is the gentle tone, not stern, not frightening, but reassuring. The government wanted people to believe preparedness was a normal and positive part of daily life, even as tensions escalated beyond anything that could be softened with warm colors and smiling characters. You can almost imagine parents reading these pamphlets at their kitchen tables, trying to shield their children from what the world was becoming. The terminals scattered throughout Mothership Zeta contain another strange echo of the past. Some human abductees had been taken decades before the war, while others were retrieved moments before the bombs fell. Their logs reveal tiny details about pre-war life, complaints about grocery shortages, excitement over new movie releases, confusion about sudden air raid drills. They serve as an accidental time capsule, preserving the final thoughts of people stolen from Earth long before they ever knew its surface would be lost. The mundanity of their concerns makes the tragedy sharper. They were thinking about weekend plans while the world was preparing to end. Inside various ruins, you can sometimes find clocks that have stopped precisely at 9:47 a.m. This is not universal, nor is it explicitly explained, but many fans believe that certain regions froze in that exact moment, not because of a synchronized blast, but because the shockwave from the bombs hitting distant targets caused delicate mechanical parts to jam all at the same instant. Whether intentional or coincidental, these clocks form a scattered constellation of lost seconds, each one marking a heartbeat when time itself seemed to fracture. The silence of a stopped clock feels heavier than rubble, as though the world itself tried to hold on to one final moment before letting go. In some abandoned factories, the rusted conveyor belts still hold half-finished products. One belt carries cereal boxes waiting for printing. Another holds assembly line robots missing their final components. These frozen workstations reveal how ordinary life continued up until the final alarm sounded. Workers fled mid-task, leaving behind objects that are trapped forever between creation and destruction. These industrial tombs feel like echoes of ambition, reminders that humans were still trying to build, produce, and improve even as their world inched toward collapse. Even the radio towers scattered across the wasteland have stories hidden in their rust. Pre-war America maintained thousands of small emergency broadcast units designed to trigger in coordinated patterns. Many never activated due to destroyed infrastructure, but a few still broadcast faint static pulses in exact 3-second intervals. These pulses were once meant to signal evacuation routes or shelter locations, but now they drift aimlessly through wasteland air. They're half-forgotten instructions from a government long gone, speaking in beeps and static to a population that no longer knows how to listen. In corporate offices buried under rubble, company memos reveal a peculiar blend of optimism and denial. Some corporations wrote cheerful letters about exciting nuclear expansion opportunities, while others gave stern warnings about stock volatility. But buried among these messages is a common thread. No one truly believed the war would happen. Companies continued planning annual retreats and holiday parties even after several international incidents. The slow collapse of diplomacy never overshadowed the bright smiles in company newsletters, leaving behind a paper trail of optimism that aged into tragedy once the world burned. Throughout the ruins of Washington, D.C., billboards still advertise futuristic home appliances with almost surreal enthusiasm. One billboard depicts a family smiling beside a nuclear-powered vacuum cleaner, promising cleaning in half the time with twice the glow. The irony is inescapable. These ads once represented national pride in atomic technology, the same force that would ultimately erase the very consumers they targeted. The cheerful slogans feel like echoes from a parallel universe where the world continued its upward climb instead of falling into fire. In the remains of old supermarkets, some checkout counters still hold pre-war currency. Paper money lies neatly stacked in cash drawers, long since worthless except as relics of belief. The dollar didn't simply lose value, it lost meaning. Caps took over not because they were practical, but because they fit the world people inherited. Rugged, improvised, durable. The old world believed paper could represent wealth. The new world trusted only what survived fire, yet some registers remained sealed, as if waiting for the cashier to return and close the books at the end of a long shift. In areas near undeployed nuclear missiles, one can find old maintenance lockers filled with strange, pristine tools left untouched by decay. These tools were preserved by radiation-sealed containers, originally designed to protect the equipment from corrosion. Ironically, these containers outlasted everything else. The missile silos are ruins, the control panels long dead, but the tools remain timeless, physical reminders of humanity's attempt to control forces far beyond its grasp. Some surviving pre-war diaries scattered across ruins in the capital wasteland, contain small details about everyday life that never appear in official lore. One diary mentions frustration with rising gas prices. Another describes a student worrying about history homework. These small concerns, preserved by accident, paint a more intimate portrait of the lost world. They remind us that behind the grandeur of war and politics were millions of people simply trying to live, unaware that history was about to flatten their entire civilization. Within certain bunkers, old clocks continue ticking, powered by tiny atomic batteries designed to last centuries. These clocks don't track modern time. They track pre-war schedules, still chiming noon and 5 o'clock as if urging workers to take lunch breaks that will never come. Their stubborn persistence creates an eerie sense of routine frozen in isolation. It's as though the bunker keeps trying to resurrect a life it was designed to protect, unaware that no one survived to enjoy its precision. And scattered across former suburbs, children's toys remain untouched in bedrooms that collapsed only partially. Some toys glow faintly from radiation exposure, soft, invisible light trapped in plastic for 200 years. These toys once brought joy to families who believed they had countless tomorrows. Their presence now serves as haunting museums of innocence, hidden in the bones of a broken world. In their quiet way, they speak louder than any terminal entry, a gentle reminder that the smallest relics often carry the heaviest echoes. The wasteland has a strange way of remembering things, even long after the people who built it are gone. Deep beneath the ruins of old Boston lies one of those memories, a pre-war server hub still humming faintly, its lights flickering like tired stars. Most wanderers never notice it, but it's the reason radios sometimes grow static near certain subway tunnels. The old machines still try to broadcast weather alerts, meant for a world that no longer exists, sending phantom signals into empty air as if waiting for someone to hear them. Some travelers claim the static almost sounds like voices, but it's really just ancient code breathing its last. Fallout's world is full of technology trying desperately not to be forgotten. Out near the glowing sea, the soil has fused into glass in places, forming fragile panes that crunch softly beneath your boots. These patches aren't just decoration. They mark the exact points where shockwaves met thermal bursts during the Great War, frozen moments of impact preserved forever. If you crouch down and listen, the glass rings lightly in the wind, almost singing. Scientists in the Brotherhood note the resonance contains trace particles of isotopes long extinct. To them, it's evidence. To wastelanders, it feels more like the land remembering a scream. Deathclaws, for all their terrifying presence, behave with surprising intelligence when unprovoked. In certain regions, they avoid stepping on old cracked pavement, preferring softer dirt. No one is entirely sure why, but xenobiologists believe it mimics pre-mutation pack behavior, where ancestors avoided unstable ground while hunting. If you ever watch one from far enough away, you see how carefully it chooses its steps, how it pauses to taste scents drifting through ruined air. There's something deeply ancient about them, something older than the vaults, older than the bombs predators shaped by time and scorched earth, moving with the patience of a world that refuses to die. Somewhere west of Novak, a weathered billboard still stands, half collapsed, half supported by rust and stubbornness. The faded paint advertises a pre-war cereal brand no one remembers. But what's odd is what's beneath it. A patch of untouched grass, greener than anything for miles. An old fertilizer sprayer, buried under the soil, still leaks microscopic nutrient spores, a relic of pre-war agricultural experiments meant to keep lawns growing in desert climates. The bombs fell, the company vanished, but the earth beneath that billboard stubbornly clings to a memory of being alive. Travelers passing through sometimes rest there, never knowing why it feels peaceful. Robco terminals across the wasteland often contain fragments of code that don't belong, little lines with no function, written in odd spacing, sometimes forming patterns when arranged correctly. Scholars believe they're signatures left by bored programmers, private jokes hidden in the backbone of America's automated future. Others think they're security traps, primitive early prototypes for what would become the Robco OS lockdown system. But most Wastelanders simply accept it without question, amused that even the smartest minds of the old world felt the need to doodle in their work. The apocalypse changed much, but not the human urge to leave a mark. Nighttime in the capital wasteland carries its own strange magic. If you stand near the Potomac after sundown, the surface sometimes glows faintly, reflecting fragments of old quantum materials washed downstream from laboratories and destroyed factories. Brotherhood scouts once thought it was radiation, but the glow isn't harmful, just a remnant of experiments designed to brighten cities at night. Now the effect paints ripples of teal and blue across otherwise silent waters. Survivors who camp nearby claim the faint light helps them sleep. In a world full of ruin, it becomes one of those rare moments where something broken feels unexpectedly gentle. Vault-Tec drafting boards once held thousands of simulations predicting post-war rebuilding efforts. Most were hopelessly optimistic, suggesting humanity would restore order within months. But hidden among them were the darker files, the ones predicting what Vault-Tec really expected. Decades without sunlight, migrations of irradiated fauna, entire regions collapsing beneath fallout density. Some of these simulations survive in abandoned terminals deep underground, still running endless loops. The most unsettling thing is how accurate they turned out to be. In their obsessive preparations, the company managed to predict almost everything except how stubbornly people would cling to hope. That part never showed up in any model. In the Mojave, old satellites still drift overhead, long since stripped of purpose, yet some panels on their undersides remain intact, catching glints of sunlight that occasionally flicker across the desert floor. NCR soldiers have reported seeing brief flashes in the sand at midday, thinking they were sniper scopes, but the truth is gentler. Reflections traveling across hundreds of miles as relics of space technology continue their aimless orbit. The wasteland doesn't know where these lights come from, only that sometimes the sky sends tiny messages in the language of lost science. Every Mr. Handy has a subtle quirk in its vocal pitch that changes depending on temperature. In cold environments, their voices deepen. In intense heat, they sharpen slightly. The modulation was originally meant to help distinguish units on the assembly line, but after the bombs fell, it became an accidental personality trait. When you meet a Handy in freezing ruins and hear its unusually somber tone, you're really hearing the sound of chilled wiring contracting around its voice modulator. Even robots feel the weather in their own mechanical way. Some radios in Fallout pick up fragments of pre-war broadcasts not because the signal survived, but because their memory capacitors retain tiny echoes of the last transmissions they processed before the EMP waves hit. These ghost frequencies sometimes replay snippets of music or announcements when certain atmospheric conditions align. Anyone passing by hears a crackle, a bar of a forgotten song, maybe a voice promising safety in shelters that no longer exist. It's not time travel. It's not magic. It's just the final heartbeat of a broadcast that never finished fading. Yet to those who hear it, the effect feels hauntingly intimate, like the past still speaks through static. You'll sometimes find Brahmins staring at seemingly nothing, their heads tilting slowly in vacant curiosity. But their senses go far beyond what most survivors realize. Their mutated physiology makes them sensitive to vibration patterns, allowing them to detect distant footsteps, distant gunfire, even tectonic shifts beneath cracked highways. When a Brahmin freezes, listening to the earth rather than the world, settlers know to pay attention. The animals can feel things humans cannot, warnings whispered through ground and bone. Before the war, Nuka World tested dozens of flavor prototypes, not just for taste, but for visual appeal under ultraviolet lighting. They wanted theme park nights to glow with neon colors so bright that families would see the drinks shining in their hands. Some of those chemicals still linger in old bottles scattered across the world. When exposed to moonlight for hours, traces of them emit faint fluorescence, creating tiny glowing spots across the wasteland. Wanderers often mistake them for mutated insects, but it's really just the last shimmer of corporate ambition left scattered among ruin. The ruins of Las Vegas were built using reinforced glass steel panels meant to withstand nuclear blasts, and while they didn't hold perfectly, many neon frames survived because they were wired into shock-resistant conduits. That's why some lights in the Mojave still flicker years after the bombs fell. Random surges from forgotten generators, trapped currents looping through brittle circuits. It makes the desert feel alive, blinking in slow motion like a dying star refusing to go dark. For some travelers, that flicker is a comfort. For others, a reminder. Either way, it's a heartbeat. When you find graffiti in Fallout scrawled warnings, jokes, or desperate notes, it usually isn't random placement. Developers often mapped them to invisible narrative trails, positioning markings so they feel like the wasteland is speaking directly to the player. A hastily written turn back at the entrance to a tunnel, a shaky arrow towards safer ground, a final plea scratched beside empty beds. These messages aren't quests. They're reminders that people lived, panicked, hoped, and dreamed here long before you arrived. Fallout's storytelling isn't only in terminals or holotapes, it's in the handwriting left behind by ghosts. And then there are the moments the game never tells you about, the hidden kindness buried beneath violence. If you follow certain settlers long enough, you'll notice they leave small offerings for others. Bottles of purified water set on makeshift graves, spare ammunition left near guard towers, a single folded cloth placed beside a broken chair where someone once rested. These actions mean nothing mechanically. They don't change stats or storylines, but they reveal something powerful. Even in a world built from ashes, people still take care of one another quietly, instinctively, without need for reward. It's those tiny gestures that keep the wasteland from collapsing completely into despair. Fallout's ruins hold destruction, but humanity still moves through them like a soft, stubborn ember refusing to burn out. The wasteland has a strange way of remembering things long after every historian, every scribe, and every scavenger has forgotten them. You can see it most clearly in the quiet spaces where nothing seems to happen at all, the stretches of land that feel too calm for their own good, as if the world is listening to itself breathe. In the Mojave, there are pockets of desert where the wind doesn't move right away. It waits a moment, a long, thoughtful pause, before sweeping across the dunes in a single, unbroken motion. Some wanderers believe this happens because the sand has been shaped for so long by explosions and heat that the land moves in patterns learned from the moment the bombs fell. They say the wind still follows the direction of shock waves that once tore across the desert, honoring a memory the living will never fully understand. There are stones scattered throughout Fallout's landscapes, marked with tiny fractures that shimmer faintly under moonlight. They look like natural imperfections, but geologists in the Brotherhood swear they've seen the same fracture patterns miles apart, repeating in impossible symmetry. It has led some to believe that when the world burned, the shock waves etched a kind of rhythm into the ground, a hidden music left behind by devastation. In this idea, The wasteland is a massive archive carved by fire, each cracked stone a note in a song the apocalypse wrote in a single, tragic instant. If you travel through the capital wasteland during late evening, you may notice how the broken streetlights cast shadows that seem just a little too long, stretching unnaturally across asphalt worn down by centuries. These shadows flicker not because the lights still function, but because the air above D.C. carries a strange thickness, a remnant of the smoke clouds that once swallowed the city. Even now, the atmosphere here behaves differently, as if the sky still reacts to the memory of catastrophe. The lights that remain fragile, cracked, and powerless create illusions of movement in the dust, as though the ghosts of old traffic still drift between skeletal ruins. In the Commonwealth, the fog rolling off the coastline holds particles that make light behave strangely, softening the edges of buildings and turning sharp silhouettes into hazy, dreamlike outlines. Some people say this fog whispers when the wind grows strong, creating sounds almost resembling words. Travelers swear they've heard their names carried across the mist, or the faraway echo of a voice they once knew. Scientists might explain this as sound distortion caused by the particles suspended in irradiated moisture, but superstitious survivors prefer a darker theory, that the ocean remembers every cry that pierced the air during the bomb's descent, replaying those final moments whenever storms begin to gather. If you wander deep into the glowing sea, the air crackles with an invisible pressure you can almost feel in your fingertips. Objects seem to warp slightly at the edges, and distant shapes flicker for a fraction of a second before settling into their real forms. Some say the radiation here bends light just enough to create illusions, fragments of the past appearing like mirages. There have been stories of wanderers claiming to see silhouettes of intact cities standing tall above the glowing dust, visions lasting no more than a blink before melting into desolation again. Whether these glimpses are hallucinations or the land's fractured memory manifesting just long enough to be felt remains a question no one can answer confidently. Mutated wildlife often behaves in ways that hint at instinctual patterns tied to the old world. Radstags move with uncanny grace across fractured overpasses, navigating broken supports as if remembering paths their ancestors once followed. They step cautiously around collapsed highways, avoiding danger with a precision that suggests memory rather than instinct. Deathclaws sometimes pause before entering ruined cities, their heads tilting toward abandoned windows as if waiting for something to signal them. Even creatures twisted beyond recognition seem to carry reflections of habits from an era long destroyed, like echoes in the bloodstream triggered by sights they should not be able to recognize. In the Mojave at night, the sands cool just enough to reveal thermal scars invisible during the day. With the right equipment or simply patient observation, you can see faint heat patterns spread across the ground in shapes resembling tire tracks, footprints, or outlines of vehicles burned into the earth by old explosions. These patterns linger far longer than they should, preserved by the desert's refusal to let the past disappear. Some adventurers say these heat traces form trails leading to hidden caches or forgotten bunkers, as if the land itself gently guides wanderers toward the remnants it refuses to bury. The strange spark of light that sometimes flickers across ruined rooftops has become the subject of dozens of theories. At first glance, it looks like metal reflecting sunlight, but it often appears at night when there's no light strong enough to produce that reflection. Some believe it's caused by leftover electromagnetic fields from forgotten military towers, occasionally sending short bursts of energy across rooftops like dying heartbeats. Others think these glimmers represent residual charge left behind by the blast wave itself. the last breath of a catastrophe still trying to dissipate after centuries. Whatever the cause, the tiny flashes give abandoned cities an eerie illusion of life, like eyes opening briefly in the ruins before closing again. In certain regions of the southwestern wastelands, cactus formations grow in spirals too perfect to be natural. Old botanists once theorized the radiation mutated them into geometric patterns, but a more mysterious idea suggests the spirals mimic magnetic fields that shifted violently during nuclear detonations. The plants might be shaping themselves according to invisible lines of energy still echoing beneath the soil. Some survivors trace these spirals across the desert like maps, claiming they lead to places where the world cracked open most violently. Whether coincidence or intentional adaptation, the plants seem to grow according to a pattern only they understand. Water in the wasteland behaves strangely in many places. In some lakes, ripples travel slowly against the wind for no apparent reason. In others, reflections appear sharper than the objects they mirror, showing details that don't exist in reality. Rumors say that these waters contain particles of rare pre-war materials capable of reacting to memory, forming mirrored images of landscapes that existed before the bombs. When the water stirs, it's as though the past tries to rise to the surface. Travelers who stare too long into these lakes sometimes claim they see shapes of intact homes or figures walking along the water's edge, only for the vision to dissolve the moment they blink. In the capital wasteland, the remains of metro tunnels echo differently depending on how deep you travel. The upper tunnels produce a normal resonance, but the lower levels carry a hollow, stretched quality, as if the sound takes longer to return. Engineers say this effect comes from collapsed chambers, altering the acoustics, but wasteland theorists whisper a more dramatic idea, that something continues to move beneath the city, shifting the air in long, slow breaths like a sleeping creature too large and too ancient to reveal itself. Whether metaphor or myth, the tunnel's strange acoustics give the impression that the underground never really fell silent after the bombs. It simply learned to change its voice. When radstorms pass over the Commonwealth, lightning sometimes strikes the same location more than once in patterns forming jagged shapes in the dust. These marks resemble early meteorological diagrams from pre-war research facilities, leading some to believe that weather monitoring equipment buried beneath the surface might still influence storm behavior. Others argue the storms themselves learned from those machines, imitating the patterns coded into them like a memory carried on radioactive wind. Whatever the truth, there is always a sense that during a radstorm, the sky is far more aware of its own behavior than a natural storm could ever be. Animal skeletons found in remote corners of the wasteland often show signs of symmetrical mutation. The bone structures sometimes form mirrored patterns too consistent for random genetic drift. Some wasteland biologists think this hints at a directional evolutionary push, influenced by environmental stressors rather than chance. Others speculate that radiation interacted with leftover electromagnetic infrastructure, shaping wildlife according to invisible grids left behind by pre-war technology. This idea paints the wasteland not as a chaotic wilderness, but as a strange collaboration between nature and machines, each shaping the other with no humans left to interfere. Even rocks exposed to centuries of fallout display strange luminescence under certain storm conditions. The glow is faint, barely noticeable, but enough to give some hillsides a ghostly green shimmer. Theories vary wildly. Some say it's phosphorescent minerals awakened by radiation. Others suggest the light is an echo of the moment of detonation, resurfacing in flashes like a memory buried beneath layers of soil. Those who travel at night often use these glowing stones as markers, following their pale shimmer like breadcrumb trails through desolate stretches of earth. And perhaps most mysterious of all are the moments when the wasteland falls completely silent, not just the absence of animals or wind, but a strange vacuum of sound where even ambient noise seems to vanish. These pockets of quiet often appear at random, lasting seconds or minutes, as though the world pauses and listens. Travelers describe these moments as deeply unsettling, yet oddly peaceful, like standing inside the pulse of the earth itself. Some believe the silence occurs when atmospheric conditions shift just right. Others think something vast and unseen moves beneath the ground, drawing in the sound as it passes. Whatever the reason, these stillnesses feel intentional, as if the wasteland occasionally stops to remember everything it has lost. The land in Fallout carries its history not in scrolls or libraries, but in wind patterns, mutated wildlife, glowing stone, and the way shadows stretch too far across broken roads. Every creature, every ruin, every ripple of air seems to hold a tiny piece of the world that once was, whispering fragments of stories to anyone quiet enough to listen. And in these whispers, carried through dust and silence, the wasteland finds its voice not loud, not violent, but soft, weary, and eternal, echoing into the long night where survivors wander, gathering meaning from a world still slowly learning how to live again. The strange beauty of the Fallout Wasteland is that even in its silence, the world feels as if it's still thinking, still remembering the old rhythms it once lived by. Nowhere is this clearer than in the broken neon signs that flicker across abandoned settlements. Their glow seems random, but hidden in the game's scripting is a pattern. Some signs pulse according to a slowed-down frequency of pre-war electrical grids. Even after 2 centuries of ruin, the ghosts of old infrastructure hum faintly through forgotten lights, as if the past refuses to go fully dark. Walk beneath a malfunctioning billboard in the Mojave or a rusted diner sign in the Commonwealth, and it almost feels like the world is trying to call out to you from before everything fell apart. In the capital wasteland, sometimes radios play a soft crackle even when switched off. This isn't a glitch. It's an ambient sound effect layered into certain ruined buildings that once housed military communication equipment. The audio designers wanted the player to feel that old transmissions still drift through the air, bouncing endlessly across dead frequencies, unable to find anyone left to hear them. Stand quietly near one of these radios, and you can almost imagine voices lost in static, saying whatever they were trying to say long after their world ended. The lanterns used by caravans across Fallout 3 and New Vegas emit a warm, flickering orange that spreads farther in cold temperatures. The engine adjusts light bloom depending on weather, so lanterns shine brighter in desert nights or freezing ruins. It's not only atmospheric, it subconsciously makes the player feel safer near travelers. Warmth equals safety in Fallout, even if it's just code deciding how light bends across sand or snow. Deep inside Vault-Tec test chambers, certain monitors cycle through frames so rapidly they appear broken, but slow the footage down and you'll find brief flashes of pre-war motivational slogans. These were never meant to be readable in-game. They exist as hidden texture layers left by an artist who wanted to imply that even malfunctioning devices still cling to the optimism fed to them decades before. Machines that once encouraged productivity now sit half-buried and flickering, trying to display messages no one will ever fully see. In the Commonwealth, radiation storms produce a distant wail beneath the thunder. Many think it's the wind, but buried in the audio mix is a modified whale call, stretched and pitched until it becomes an unearthly moan. It was added to create the sense that the storm itself is alive, a massive, roaming creature made of dust and static and memory. When green lightning flashes across the horizon, the low roar that follows feels less like weather and more like something breathing, something ancient walking overhead. Gamblers in New Vegas sometimes hear faint jingling in empty casinos, a single chip sliding across a table, or a slot machine paying out coins no one touched. These are small ambient cues placed randomly to make the buildings feel haunted by their past. The Mojave's casinos aren't abandoned. They're frozen in a time loop of luck, greed, and hope, still performing rituals they once lived for, even when no gamblers remain. In Fallout 4, the Brotherhood of Steel's vertibirds cast moving shadows that stretch unnaturally long at sunset. The effect comes from a lighting bug where the shadow projection doesn't fully match the model. But thematically, it works perfectly. The Brotherhood looms larger than life, imposing a shadow too big for the sky to hold. Every time a vertibird roars overhead, its silhouette stretches across rooftops and highways, marking the wasteland like a brand. Caesar's Legion in New Vegas marches to drums that echo across the desert, but those drum sounds are built from repurposed thuds of distant explosions. The developers mix together slow detonations, hitting them with heavy bass to create a militaristic rhythm that feels ancient and brutal. Their music is literally built from violence, echoes of the old world's destruction reforged into a new empire's heartbeat. If you stand near water in Fallout 3 during a radstorm, you'll notice the ripples move out of sync. The top layer reacts to wind, while the bottom layer responds to invisible radiation pulses. It's a tiny detail, but it makes the water feel alive in a hostile, unnatural way, as though radiation changes not only its color, but its memory of how to move. The protectrons scattered across various facilities use an idle animation that includes a tiny upward twitch of the head every few seconds. This was meant to mimic the motion of early factory robots searching for assembly line markers. But in the wasteland, that tiny motion feels like hesitation, a robot trying to remember a job it can never return to. There's sadness coded into metal, hiding in the smallest of movements. Even the trees tell stories. In the capital wasteland, dead trunks lean consistently toward the east. The blast wave from nuclear strikes pushed them that way, and after the shock faded, they stayed forever frozen in the direction of destruction. The environment itself remembers the moment the world ended. Some terminals across all Fallout games flicker in perfect rhythm with the user's heartbeat sound effect when health is low. The timing isn't random. It's meant to create a subtle sense that the world is syncing with your desperation, as if the machines around you can feel your panic and mirror it back in dim light. The super mutants created by the forced evolutionary virus share certain idle vocalizations with death claws. They're not identical, but close enough that the two creatures seem distantly related, a hint that both have roots in twisted human experimentation. Even their growls carry the echo of someone's forgotten attempt to perfect the wasteland. And then there are the trains of Fallout 3, rusted, silent, permanently frozen in place. But hidden beneath, some of them are still functioning echo triggers. Clap beneath an old rail car, and the sound reverberates like metal under pressure, as though the train still wants to run but no longer remembers how. The game never asks you to notice this. It's just there, a tiny reminder that even machines feel haunted by what they were built to do. Across the wasteland, gravestones sometimes lean toward the nearest settlement. It's a quirk of terrain generation, but symbolically, it feels like the dead are still trying to return home. Even in this broken world, the pull of belonging endures. And in New Vegas, during rare, foggy mornings, the strip's neon lights bleed through the haze in pastel shades instead of harsh neons. The glow softens, almost dreamlike, as though the city is remembering a kinder morning before war transformed it into a monument of chance and survival. The wasteland, for all its ruin, carries a strange tenderness. Lights remember patterns, machines recall their purpose, and even storms seem to mourn the world they erased. Everything in Fallout is broken, but everything is still trying, still echoing, humming, resisting silence. The wasteland may be empty, but it is never quiet. It remembers everything. The wasteland carries a rhythm that isn't immediately noticeable, something quiet beneath the wind and the sand, a pulse that seems to whisper stories forgotten by the people who once walked its streets. In the ruins of old suburbs around the capital wasteland, some houses hum faintly at night, a low electrical sigh coming from wires that no longer carry power. The hum is produced by lingering audio layers meant to simulate structural tension, but players often describe it as the home remembering what it once was, a final echo of family dinners, ticking clocks, and warm lights before time took its slow breath and folded everything into silence. Walking through these places feels like drifting through the memories of the world itself, pieces of a life now preserved only in dust. Near the outskirts of Novak, the sand behaves strangely around abandoned vehicles. It gathers into tiny, perfectly shaped ripples, never disturbed by storms or footsteps. This effect wasn't intentional. It appears because the physics engine treats rusted metal as a heat source, causing the sand to shift in circular patterns around it. Even in a world without functioning engines, the cars still radiate warmth in a symbolic sense, remnants of motion in a land that has almost forgotten how movement once felt. The desert shapes itself around these skeletons, protecting them like relics of a past era. The radios scattered throughout the wasteland broadcast more than just music. Some of them emit faint background static patterns that, when slowed down, reveal a steady rhythmic pulse. Developers confirmed it was meant to mimic the faint beat of an engine idling, a subtle reminder that technology once thrived, its heartbeat echoing through every home and streetlight. When you stand still and listen, the static almost feels comforting, like a mechanical lullaby left behind by an age of invention. In the glowing sea, the air holds particles that shimmer faintly at dawn. They aren't visible during storms or under direct sunlight, only in the brief moments when the sky turns pale. These particles are the remnants of a scrapped radiation visual system, tiny embers that drift upward, symbolizing the world trying to breathe out the poison trapped in its soil. Watching them float is strangely peaceful, like standing in a place that has long accepted its fate, but still finds beauty in its own ruin. Deep inside Vault 34, water pools in corners and along walls, creating soft echoes with each droplet. The audio designer intentionally tuned the echo to mimic the slow rhythm of a heartbeat, creating an atmosphere where every step feels like walking through the vault's own memories. The water sings an old song of neglect, of doors left sealed too long, of humanity hiding from consequences until the vault itself could no longer hold its burdens. It's a quiet tragedy reflected in every dripping corridor. If you stand on the cliffs overlooking the Colorado River in New Vegas during sunset, the entire canyon changes color with a subtle gradient that shifts from gold to violet. The effect was originally designed as a way to mask a lighting bug, but the result makes the river look almost mythic, as if it has survived the end of the world by transforming itself into something eternal. The canyon holds stories older than the bombs, and for a brief moment at twilight, the world seems to remember them. Around the Commonwealth, abandoned playgrounds carry faint, metallic groans when wind passes through their empty swings. The noise isn't random. It's tied to an old physics node designed to simulate tension in metal structures. That means each playground has its own voice, a soft, tired melody sung through rusted chains. The sound is eerie, but also strangely gentle, like childhood memories trying to speak through the ruins. Near the Nuka World Transit Center, old advertising screens flicker once every hour. They're not broadcasting anything, but the flicker is tied to an in-game timer meant to simulate scheduled ads. Even after the collapse of society, even after the last employee left their shift, the schedule remains, endlessly waiting to display something bright and cheerful in a world that no longer remembers joy. The emptiness makes the flicker feel almost mournful, an echo of a dream that still tries to wake up. In the Mojave, certain rocks hum quietly when you stand close to them. The hum is caused by overlapping sound triggers meant for distant machinery, but because the world is so quiet in certain areas, the vibration becomes noticeable. It creates the illusion that the desert itself is alive, whispering ancient tones carried through the stone. Some players describe the hum as comforting, a reminder that even in desolation, the land still holds a heartbeat. Hidden near a collapsed freeway in the capital wasteland lies a lone radio tower that continues to broadcast a signal with no voice and no song, just a faint, looping wave. The frequency was left behind as a developer test signal, but lore fans often interpret it as a final message sent by someone who refused to let go of hope. The quiet persistence of the signal feels almost human, like someone is still trying to reach anyone willing to listen. Inside abandoned Vault-Tec offices, the filing cabinets contain loose papers with scribbles, diagrams, and notes. Some are nonsense placeholders, but others reference unfinished experiments and behavioral predictions that never made it into the game. They hint at fears the pre-war scientists never spoke aloud, anxieties about the world they were about to reshape. Reading through them feels like watching someone's guilt preserved in ink, left behind by people who were trying to justify the unjustifiable. On certain nights in the Mojave, the stars appear brighter than usual. The engine uses a variable skybox brightness system meant to adjust based on weather patterns, but under rare conditions, it intensifies the starlight to levels not normally seen. The effect makes the wasteland feel almost hopeful for a few brief moments, as though the universe is leaning closer, offering comfort to anyone still wandering beneath its endless sky. Beneath that starlight, even ruins feel peaceful. Standing near the broken monorail in New Vegas, you can sometimes hear a soft chirping sound, not from insects, but from a glitched reverb assigned to the old power lines. It creates a faint melody, like an electronic bird singing a forgotten tune. The sound blends seamlessly with the desert atmosphere, transforming a technology failure into something strangely beautiful. It feels like a tiny survivor of the pre-war world, singing to no one in particular. In the Commonwealth's abandoned theaters, dust particles drift in beams of light in a way that looks almost choreographed. This effect was created to mimic nostalgia itself, a soft haze meant to remind players of old movie projectors and memories caught in sunlight. Standing there feels like stepping into someone else's dream, where time flows a little slower and the world holds on gently to the moments it refuses to forget. The ocean along the eastern coast carries faint echoes when waves crash against metal debris. The sound layering uses reversed audio samples, causing the splash to resemble a whisper being sucked back into the sea. It gives the ocean a voice, tired and mournful, murmuring secrets from the deep. Even without creatures or ships, the water feels alive, holding stories no one will ever fully understand. In the deepest corners of the wasteland, where no quests lead and no markers point, the land becomes strangely quiet. The wind calms, the music fades, and ambient creatures stop spawning. These pockets of stillness exist to prevent performance issues, but the silence feels purposeful, as if the world pauses to watch you, giving space for your presence to echo. In those moments, the wasteland feels like a living diary waiting for you to write something into it. When distant thunder rolls through broken skylines, the sound often arrives in a slow wave, reaching you several seconds after the flash of light. The delay simulates real atmospheric depth, but in Fallout, it adds something more, a sense that storms are memories of old wars, echoes of detonations that reshaped the world. Thunder becomes a ghost of the past, reminding both the land and the listener of everything that was lost. And as you continue wandering through the ruins, you eventually realize that everything in Fallout, every crack in the pavement, every flickering bulb, every broken sign, is telling a story, a world trying to remember itself, a world that refuses to vanish, even after its darkest day. The wasteland breathes through silence, through light, through ruins, holding on to hope the same way it holds on to dust, quietly, patiently, eternally. As the wasteland settles into another quiet night, the old world and the new world begin to overlap in strange places, revealing fragments of stories that never quite died. In the ruins of old parking garages, sometimes the pre-war advertisements still flicker for a split second when lightning flashes, as though the signs remember the glow of electricity long after the wires beneath them crumbled into dust. The coding behind those lights ties directly into the weather system, so a storm becomes a moment where the past and present share a heartbeat. It feels like the world itself can't decide which version of history it wants to illuminate, hesitating between memory and decay. There are places in the Commonwealth where radios pick up faint voices that don't correspond to any known broadcast. They whisper half-formed sentences, garbled by static, as though the signal is drifting across time instead of space. These ghost frequencies are byproducts of unused channels tied to the early development of the Minutemen storyline, but in-game, they feel like the last lonely echoes of a world that fell too quickly to finish speaking. Stand near certain ruined rooftops, and you can hear fragments of music no one remembers writing, drifting through the broken antenna towers like dreams trapped in metal. Far west in New Vegas, the dry desert wind carries dust that was once the walls of pre-war casinos. The strip gleams with neon, but beneath that modern glow lies an invisible haze of powdered marble, glitter, and glass, the remnants of luxury dissolved into sand. When characters mention that the Mojave remembers everything, they're not exaggerating. The desert literally carries traces of the world before the bombs, and every breeze becomes a silent retelling of events no one survived. The robots scattered across Fallout's wasteland behave strangely whenever they pass through intact pre-war zones. Protectrons hesitate mid-step, Mr. Handy's pause in the middle of their routines, and some iBots tilt slightly as though listening for a voice they once served. Their AI scripts contain fallback memory loops meant to recognize familiar environments, and even though those routines were never fully implemented, the machines still respond subconsciously. It's as if they feel nostalgia or something close to it, wandering through the ruins of the age that built them. At the edges of the glowing sea, the atmosphere bends light in strange ways, making shadows stretch and curl into shapes that don't match the objects casting them. The radiation storms there alter both lighting and color curves, creating a subtle distortion effect. Scientists in-game believe it's due to chemical residue clinging to the soil, but the effect feels almost supernatural, as if the land is trying to rewrite its own outline. Travelers say that when you walk through those twisted shadows, you feel like you're walking across the ghost of a world burned into the ground itself. In the capital wasteland, some metro tunnels hum at a frequency barely audible to human ears. The leftover machinery deep underground still tries to run ventilation systems that no longer exist, their motors spinning in empty chambers. The echo creates pressure changes that feel like breaths in the dark. Wanderers have reported the sensation of being watched, but the only living thing responding is the tunnel itself, a massive steel lung still trying to inhale a world that no longer fills it. At certain pre-war schools, Chalkboards remain spotless despite 2 centuries of neglect. The boards are scripted with a protective property used in early design to prevent texture degradation. What was once a developer tool becomes a haunting artifact. Classrooms, where time refuses to settle dust, as if the building is waiting for its students to walk back in and finish a lesson interrupted by the end of the world. The Mojave's sky changes color in subtle ways depending on which faction controls Hoover Dam. Even before quests conclude, the lighting engine begins adjusting palettes to foreshadow future influence. Warmer tones if the NCR's grip strengthens, colder hues if the Legion's shadow spreads, and a sharper, almost metallic light if House begins to assert dominance. Players rarely notice consciously, but subconsciously the sky is already shifting toward the future, as if the world itself senses the political tides long before the Wasteland's people do. There's a bunker in the Commonwealth where the lights flicker in a perfect rhythm, 3 long pulses, 1 short, then 3 more long. It corresponds to no known Morse code message, but it mirrors the pattern of the reactor startup sequence from Vault-Tec training simulations. The pattern is so exact that it's believed to be leftover programming in the lighting grid, a forgotten blueprint echoing through a dead bunker, reminding the empty halls of the power they were once meant to contain. Even the wildlife of Fallout carries faint traces of pre-war influence. Brahmin grazing patterns match the rotational schedules of automated feeders that existed before the bombs. Radstags tend to gather near the foundations of old national parks, drawn to minerals embedded in the soil from long-dead irrigation systems. Deathclaws avoid certain industrial ruins because their mutated senses pick up residual electromagnetic signatures from machinery that hasn't worked in 2 centuries. The wasteland creatures move like shadows of the past, navigating a world that still whispers instructions, even in silence. In New Vegas, the Securitrons lining the strip have a dormant behavior tied to parades. Early builds of the game included pre-war celebrations where robots would march in formation, flashing lights, and playing synchronized jingles. Though the feature was cut, the animation triggers still exist. That's why some players notice Securitrons occasionally turning in perfect unison or pausing as though waiting for music to start. They were built for festivities the world never lived long enough to enjoy. In the Commonwealth, some ruined houses generate flickering candlelight even when no flame is present. It's a lighting bug, but it creates the eerie impression that the memories of families linger within the walls, warm glows that never fully died, illuminating dinner tables frozen in time. The effect appears most often in homes containing intact toys or photo frames, as though the physics engine instinctively attaches light to remnants of happiness. Far north in the capital wasteland, cold ruins produce a strange phenomenon where footsteps echo twice, once from your boots and once from a faint, softer sound delayed by half a second. It's caused by overlapping environmental audio zones, but it feels almost like retracing someone else's path, their steps permanently embedded in the concrete. You walk through the echoes of people who never made it past the day the bombs fell. The pre-war billboards of Fallout hold secrets no one ever points out. Many depict idealized families staring off into a horizon that no longer exists, but their poses match propaganda posters used in real-world civil defense drills. Some even mirror actual ad campaigns from the 1,950 seconds, reinterpreted through Fallout's retro-futurist lens. The world never hides its inspirations, it simply folds them into ruins, letting fiction and history decay together in the dust. And sometimes, late at night in the wasteland, when storms have faded and the world sits perfectly still, your Pip-Boy emits a faint hum even when it's turned off. The sound isn't part of the device. It's environmental noise tied to invisible radiation hotspots, gently vibrating the air. It creates the illusion that your Pip-Boy is whispering secrets, humming along with the dying heartbeat of the old world. The wasteland is full of questions without answers, mysteries buried under ash, and quiet theories waiting for someone willing to listen. Night settles strangely across the wasteland, carrying with it a kind of quiet that feels older than the ruins themselves. In Fallout, nighttime isn't just darker, the entire world breathes differently. Ambient loops fade into deeper tones, crickets shift pitch, and the hum of irradiated air begins to layer itself with faint micro-oscillations meant to mimic Geiger noise at a distance. The wasteland becomes a living instrument, tuning itself to the slow rhythm of a world trying to remember its own heartbeat. And when you walk through it, your footsteps take on an echo shaped by the terrain, the dust, and even your character's level. A design trick that makes the night feel heavier as you grow stronger, as if the world acknowledges your weight on its soil. There's a curious detail in old red rocket stations. The hydraulic hiss of the garage door is timed to the exact tempo of an assembly machine used in pre-war factories. The designers chose the sound intentionally, symbolizing how even before the bombs fell, America's identity was slowly becoming one of machinery and automation. Every red rocket door opens not with a natural sound, but with the breath of industry, a reminder that the world was already halfway to ruin long before nuclear fire finished the job. Geckos in Fallout, New Vegas, behave strangely around the edges of cliffs. Their AI pathing includes a fear value normally reserved for NPCs with trauma flags, meaning a gecko recognizes lethal drops the same way a human would. This makes them shuffle nervously at canyon edges, occasionally backing away as though recalling some ancient memory of falling. Whether intentional or not, the wasteland's wildlife seems to remember dangers that existed long before radiation warped their skin and sharpened their teeth. Some terminals in Fallout 4 flicker a single extra frame of static when first activated. That one frame references a corrupted font file left over from an abandoned UI redesign. But inside the noise patterns, you can make out fragments of letters: RMN, SYS, and org, shorthand for Remnant System Organic. No one ever clarified what the phrase meant, but fans widely believe it hints at pre-war experiments where machines were being taught to store human memory. A quiet implication that the world of Fallout was already beginning to merge man and machine before atomic fire made the idea a necessity for survival. Wind farms scattered across various wasteland maps rotate with faint inconsistencies, as if powered by gusts that don't exist. The real reason lies in a randomization algorithm meant to simulate weather before weather systems were fully added. But the effect creates something unintentionally poetic: silent machines still trying to catch non-existent wind, eternally repeating tasks assigned by a world that no longer remembers why it needed power in the first place. The Brotherhood of Steel's power armor stations contain small engraving marks along the metal braces. These symbols match early engineering notation used by pre-war aircraft technicians. They weren't meant for lore, just detail, but they end up implying that the Brotherhood inherited not only the technology, but the culture of the old Air Force, turning aircraft maintenance traditions into rituals for sacred war machines. Every suit of power armor carries that legacy like invisible handwriting, rusted but stubborn, carved into steel meant to outlive the world. In Fallout 3, Mirelurks emit faint clicking noises even when idle. Under audio analysis, those clicks match the mating patterns of real-world horseshoe crabs, but the timing has been exaggerated into sequences that resemble primitive language, repeating rhythms, pauses, and intensities as if they're communicating. It adds a strange depth to creatures often dismissed as monsters. beings whose ancestors evolved past humanity's fall, building their own kind of culture in the irradiated silence of the Potomac's shores. The NCR's flags wave entirely differently depending on how close you stand to them. Up close, the cloth moves with realistic jitter. From a distance, it shifts in broader, smoother waves. This dual animation system was originally made to save memory, but it creates a fascinating illusion. Up close, the NCR looks uncertain, its banner trembling with every breeze. From afar, it looks powerful, its ideals sweeping across the desert in long, confident strokes. The wasteland shows you two NCRs, depending on how closely you choose to look. In Fallout 4, glowing sea fog carries trace amounts of invisible particle effects that drift upward, not downward. They represent microorganisms dying in irradiated water and releasing energy into the air. The developers called it bioluminescent decay. It means every fog bank over that broken ocean is, in a quiet way, alive, or at least used to be. Each drifting spark is the last breath of a creature long gone, rising like a tiny soul into a world that has forgotten how many things it buried beneath its tides. Sometimes, when you interact with old holotapes, they take a moment longer to load if your character is irradiated. This isn't a glitch. Holotape readers in Fallout 4 were given sensitivity to radiation to simulate analog interference. Radiation weakens magnetic tape in the real world, and the game mirrors this with imperfect fidelity. Every hiccup, every moment of static, becomes one more reminder that the past is fragile, and the more irradiated your present becomes, the harder it is to access what came before. The gunners in Fallout 4 use combat stims far more often than other factions. Their AI prioritizes survival buffs because their lore base indicates a culture of self-preservation above all else. But a deeper detail lies hidden. Their stim usage increases the longer a battle goes on, suggesting that their nerves deteriorate as the fight drags, fear building, adrenaline burning out. They behave like mercenaries who have seen too much, fighting desperately to avoid becoming part of the ruins they inhabit. In Fallout New Vegas, Night Stalkers produce shadows that flicker unnaturally, as though cast from two different light sources at once. This effect was originally an error in the hybrid model system where Coyote and Rattlesnake components overlapped. But the result feels strangely fitting. Creatures made from two worlds casting two shadows, existing in a space where creation itself feels confused. They are reminders of the divide between nature and the wasteland, caught between what they were and what the world forced them to become. The boats along the Potomac in Fallout 3 sometimes creak in windless weather. The creaking sound uses a conditional trigger tied not to wind, but to radiation fluctuations. As nearby rads spike even slightly, boats respond as though shifting under stress. The implication is subtle. Radiation, even when invisible, applies pressure to the environment, causing the world to groan under its unseen weight. The boats creak because the air itself is sick. One of the most overlooked features of Fallout's radios is that their static changes pitch depending on elevation. The higher you climb, the thinner the static becomes, the closer it resembles the faint whine of electromagnetic interference. It means the wasteland sky is still congested with echoes of pre-war signals, drifting forever, messages without receivers, lost in a world that doesn't remember how to listen. Under certain moonlit conditions in Fallout New Vegas, the desert sands turn pale blue. This is caused by a duplicated light layer mislabeled as moon, low, which glows slightly brighter than intended. But to players, it creates a dreamlike effect, a Mojave washed clean under a phantom moon, glowing like a world halfway between memory and rebirth. Nights like this make the wasteland feel almost peaceful, as if nature is trying, quietly, to forgive what was done to it. Deep inside Vault 88, abandoned blueprint tables show incomplete sketches of machinery intended for population control experiments. But the diagrams contain stray doodles, smiling faces, crude flowers, childish shapes. These weren't drawn by in-game characters, but by a developer testing brush tools. Yet the effect is chilling. In a place built for manipulation and isolation, someone once stood at that table and unconsciously reached for innocence, a reminder that even the darkest corners of the Vault Tech vision were touched briefly by human hands still capable of softness. When a radstorm forms in Fallout 4, plants sway at double speed for a moment before stabilizing. This is caused by physics recalibrating to new wind intensity, but the effect almost looks like the vegetation shuddering, as though the wasteland itself senses the coming storm and recoils. It's a detail easy to miss, but it adds a layer of instinct to a land that no longer lives but refuses to stop reacting. The Protectrons in Fallout behave with a strange kind of politeness. Their speech files include unnecessary please and thank you phrases that rarely play. These were vestiges of early writing, when robots were meant to reflect a society obsessed with efficiency, cloaked in friendliness, customer service culture taken to absurd heights. Despite the war, the bombs, and the centuries of decay, some machines still cling to that politeness. The world ended, but customer service survived, and out in the wastes, sometimes at sunset, the lighting engine produces faint golden halos around debris piles. They appear for only a few frames, caused by sun reflection algorithms mixing improperly with irradiated fog. But the effect is beautiful. Ruins glowing briefly like they remember what they once were, bathed in the last light of a world that no longer exists. For a moment, the wasteland looks almost holy. Then the sun dips below the horizon, and everything falls back into shadow, leaving only the memory of light behind.